The laughter started before Ethan Miller finished his sentence, and that moment stayed with him long after the smoke from the grill drifted into the summer sky. The backyard was full, crowded with folding chairs, paper plates, and family members who had known him his whole life and believed they already understood who he was. The barbecue was loud and cheerful, the kind of gathering where people talked over each other and remembered old stories. But for Ethan, the noise faded the second he decided to speak. He had stood near the picnic table with his drink warming. In his hand, his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit, because this was not just a casual announcement. This was something he had carried quietly for years. He told them he was leaving his safe office job, the one they all praised him for, and that he wanted to open a small woodworking studio, a place where he could build things by hand, take his time, and finally feel proud of what he made. At first, there was confusion on their faces, then surprise, and then amusement. His uncle laughed loudly, thinking it was a joke, and slapped the table as if Ethan had delivered a punchline. A cousin shook his head and asked if this was some kind of phase. Someone else joked that he would be back asking for his old job within a month. Ethan tried to smile, but his throat felt tight and the words he wanted to say stayed stuck inside him. He noticed how quickly the conversation moved on, as if his dream was too small to deserve more than a few seconds of attention. His mother gave him a careful smile that carried more worry than faith. And she asked if he was being realistic, if he had thought this through, if he understood how hard life could be. He nodded, though no one waited for his answer. The grill sizzled, someone turned up the music, and the laughter rolled on, leaving Ethan standing there feeling both seen and invisible at the same time. He stepped away from the crowd and moved toward the edge of the yard where an old oak tree cast a wide shadow, and for a moment he wondered if they were right. He had always been the dependable one, the quiet one, the man who chose stability over risk, and maybe that was all they could see when they looked at him. The idea that he might want something different, something uncertain but meaningful, felt strange to them, almost uncomfortable. As he stood there, his mind drifted to the long nights he spent sketching furniture designs at his kitchen table. The calm he felt when working with his hands, and the way time seemed to disappear when he imagined a future built on his own terms. That feeling had been real, even if the laughter tried to make it smaller. He glanced back toward the house and noticed Claire, a friend of the family who had come with his cousin, watching him from across the yard. She wasn't laughing. Her expression was thoughtful, and when their eyes met, she gave him a small, quiet nod. Not in agreement or praise, but in understanding. That simple moment gave him more comfort than he expected, and for the first time since he had spoken, he felt steady again. The rest of the barbecue passed in a blur. People talked about sports, work promotions, and plans for the next holiday, and no one brought up Ethan's announcement again. He stayed polite, answered questions when asked, and helped clean up when the sun began to set. But inside, he felt like he was already leaving, already stepping away from the version of himself they preferred. When he finally said his goodbyes and walked to his car, the air felt cooler and the sky was streaked with orange and purple. As he drove home, the laughter replayed in his mind, but it didn't sound as loud as it had before. Instead, it sounded distant, like something he had already moved past. By the time he reached his apartment, he knew one thing clearly. Being laughed at had hurt, but staying silent forever would have hurt more. That night, as he lay awake listening to the quiet, Ethan understood that the barbecue was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a choice he had already made, and no amount of laughter could take that away. Ethan woke before his alarm, the early morning lights spilling through the blinds and settling across the room like a quiet signal that it was time to move forward. The laughter from the barbecue no longer echoed in his head the way it had the night before. And instead, there was a calm feeling in his chest that surprised him with its strength. He moved through his small apartment with purpose, packing a few essentials into his car, placing folders of paperwork on the passenger seat, and locking the door without hesitation. The drive across town felt shorter than usual, the roads nearly empty, the radio turned off so he could sit with his thoughts. He wasn't running away from his family or trying to prove anything. He was simply choosing himself for the first time, and that truth felt solid. When he reached the old warehouse near the river, he parked and sat in the car for a moment, taking in the worn brick walls, the tall windows, and the faded sign that once belonged to another business, long forgotten. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the smell of dust and wood. And as sunlight poured through the windows, he could already picture the space filled with tools, work tables, and pieces slowly taking shape under his hands. He walked through every corner, running his fingers along the walls, measuring distances with his eyes, feeling grounded in a way he never had in any office cubicle. The fear he expected didn't come, and instead there was a deep sense of rightness that settled into him as he imagined long days of honest work and quiet evenings knowing he had created something real. After leaving the warehouse, Ethan drove to the small cafe near downtown, the one he visited often on weekends but never stayed long enough to be noticed. When he walked in, he saw Claire behind the counter, tying her apron and smiling at a regular customer, and she looked genuinely surprised when she saw him standing there so early. Without asking, she poured him a cup of coffee the way he liked it and slid it across the counter, her eyes searching his face as if she could tell something had changed. They spoke easily, without small talk, and he told her about the warehouse, the lease, and how it felt to finally step into a life he had only imagined before. Claire listened closely, leaning against the counter, her expression warm and honest, and she told him she admired his courage even when he doubted it himself. Her words stayed with him, not as praise but as encouragement. And for a moment, the cafe felt like a safe pause between the past and whatever came next. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at it, knowing it would be another reminder of the life he was slowly leaving behind. But instead of answering, he silenced it and finished his coffee. As he stood to leave, Claire wished him luck in a way that felt personal, as if she was invested in the journey. And when he stepped back outside, the world seemed sharper, more alive. He spent the rest of the day setting things in motion, signing papers, making calls, and organizing schedules, moving quickly and without doubt, because stopping now would only invite fear back in. As evening approached, he sat in his car again, the warehouse keys resting in his palm, and thought about his family, not with anger, but with clarity. They laughed because they didn't understand, and maybe one day they would, but that couldn't be the reason he stayed stuck. He opened the family group chat, typed a short message inviting them to see the space the next morning, and sent it before he could overthink it. When the message was delivered, he felt a quiet release, like he had finally spoken in a language that matched his heart. That night, Ethan went home tired but fulfilled, knowing that regardless of what happened next, he'd crossed a line he could never step back over. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt open instead of frightening. Explain Part 3 in 800 words. Write the story, fast pace. Don't repeat things. Use simple words. Write in paragraph. Don't make one-line sentence. Write all in a paragraph. Write only the story. Story must be good. Write the story according to YouTube. Monetization policies. The next morning arrived with a quiet tension that filled the air around the warehouse, and Ethan felt it as he unlocked the door and prepared the space, wiping down surfaces and checking every detail even though he had already done it twice. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the finished pieces arranged carefully across the floor. And as he stepped back, he felt a mix of pride and nerves that tightened his chest. He didn't know who would come or what they would say, but he knew he needed to stand there and let the work speak for him. Cars began to pull up outside sooner than he expected, and one by one familiar faces appeared at the door. Some curious, some doubtful, some wearing the same polite smiles they had worn at the barbecue. His uncle was the first to step inside, glancing around as if waiting for a punchline, followed by his mother, his cousins, and a few relatives who hadn't believed the invitation was serious until they saw the building themselves. As they walked through this space, their voices softened, and the jokes they might have made stayed unspoken as they noticed the heavy wooden tables, the smooth chairs, and the small details that showed care and patience. Ethan stayed near the entrance at first, his hands in his pockets, watching their reactions instead of explaining anything, because he wanted them to see what he had built without being told how to feel about it. His mother stopped at a dining table and ran her fingers along the edge, her expression changing as she felt the solid weight of it, and she asked quietly how long it took to make. The next morning arrived with a quiet tension that filled the air around the warehouse, and Ethan felt it as he unlocked the door and prepared the space, wiping down surfaces and checking every detail even though he had already done it twice. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the finished pieces arranged carefully across the floor. And as he stepped back, he felt a mix of pride and nerves that tightened his chest. He didn't know who would come or what they would say, but he knew he needed to stand there and let the work speak for him. Cars began to pull up outside sooner than he expected, and one by one, familiar faces appeared at the door. Some curious, some doubtful, some wearing the same polite smiles they had worn at the barbecue. His uncle was the first to step inside, glancing around as if waiting for a punchline, followed by his mother, his cousins, and a few relatives who hadn't believed the invitation was serious until they saw the building themselves. As they walked through the space, their voices softened, and the jokes they might have made stayed unspoken as they noticed the heavy wooden tables, the smooth chairs, and the small details that showed care and patience. Ethan stayed near the entrance at first, his hands in his pockets, watching their reactions instead of explaining anything, because he wanted them to see what he had built without being told how to feel about it. His mother stopped at a dining table and ran her fingers along the edge, her expression changing as she felt the solid weight of it. And she asked quietly how long it took to make, her voice no longer doubtful but curious. Ethan answered calmly, explaining his process in simple words. And he noticed how people started asking real questions instead of teasing ones, wanting to know where the wood came from, how long he had been learning, and what his plans were. The room grew quieter as understanding replaced disbelief, and the space felt filled with something heavier than sound, a shared moment of realization that couldn't be rushed. When Claire arrived, the energy shifted again, not louder but warmer, and she smiled at Ethan in a way that told him she had believed in him before any proof was needed. She walked slowly through the workshop, stopping at each piece, touching the surfaces with respect. And when she spoke, her words carried a gentle certainty that cut through the last traces of doubt in the room. She said the work was beautiful, not in a dramatic way, but with honesty that left no room for argument. And the silence that followed felt full rather than uncomfortable. His uncle cleared his throat and nodded, offering a short comment about underestimating the effort involved. And his cousins exchanged looks that showed their opinions had shifted even if they didn't know how to say it yet. Ethan felt his chest loosen as he realized no defense was needed, no long explanation, no argument about choices or money, because what stood in front of them was real and undeniable. Someone suggested he could do well if he stayed consistent. Another mentioned knowing, a friend who might place an order, and the conversation moved naturally into support without forcing it. As the group continued walking, Ethan found himself standing beside Claire, close enough to feel the calm presence she carried, and for a brief moment the noise of the world seemed to fade, leaving only the shared understanding between them. When his mother finally turned to him, her eyes were wet but steady, and she told him she was proud of him, not because the furniture looked expensive or impressive, but because he had followed something he truly cared about. That simple statement stayed with him as the group slowly began to leave, lingering longer than expected, as if they didn't want the moment to end too quickly. After the last car pulled away, the warehouse fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt earned, filled with respect and new beginnings. Ethan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his work, and realized that being speechless wasn't always about shock. Sometimes it was about finally understanding something that had been there all along. The weeks after the warehouse visit moved quickly, filled with long days and steady progress. And Ethan barely noticed how much his life was changing until one quiet evening made him stop and breathe. Orders started coming in slowly at first, then faster, spread by word of mouth and quiet recommendations. And each request felt like a small confirmation that he had chosen the right path. He woke early every morning, unlocked the workshop with a sense of purpose, and worked until the light outside faded. Shaping wood with patience and care, feeling tired in a way that was honest rather than draining. His family checked in more often now, not with doubt, but with curiosity. Asking how things were going, sharing his work with friends, and sometimes stopping by just to see what he was building next. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And Ethan accepted it without holding on to old hurt, because he understood they needed time to see him clearly. Claire became a steady part of his days, sometimes bringing coffee to the workshop, sometimes sitting nearby reading while he worked. The quiet companionship between them growing naturally without pressure or expectation. They talked about simple things at first, then deeper ones, about choices they almost didn't make. About fear disguised as comfort. And about how easy it was to lose yourself when you tried too hard to meet other people's ideas of success. One evening, after closing up the shop, they walked along the river as the sky darkened, the sound of water steady and calming. And Claire told him how watching him stand firm in his decision had made her reflect on her own life in ways she hadn't expected. Ethan listened closely, not trying to solve anything, just present. Realizing that connection didn't need grand gestures to feel meaningful. When their hands brushed, neither of them pulled away, and the moment felt calm and right, not rushed, not dramatic, just honest. Back at his family home a month later, another gathering took place under the same oak tree where laughter once lingered. But the feeling was different now, warmer, softer, and filled with respect. Relatives asked questions about his work with genuine interest. And his uncle proudly pointed out photos of Ethan's furniture on his phone, telling others how talented he had always been, even if he hadn't seen it before. Ethan didn't correct him or hold on to the past because he knew growth often came quietly and understanding didn't always arrive on time. His mother pulled him aside near the end of the evening and hugged him tightly, telling him she worried because she loved him, not because she doubted him, and for the first time. Ethan felt the weight of that truth lift from his chest as the sun dipped low and the yard filled with soft light. Claire stood beside him, comfortable and close. And Ethan realized that the choice he made hadn't just changed his career. It had changed how he showed up in his own life. He was no longer waiting for permission or approval, no longer shaping himself to fit expectations that didn't belong to him. And that confidence carried into every part of his world. Late that night, after the guests left and the yard grew quiet, Ethan sat alone for a moment, listening to the wind move through the leaves. Thinking about how far he had come from that first painful laugh, he understood now that being misunderstood was not a failure, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was continue forward even when no one clapped. The silence that once felt lonely now felt peaceful, filled with the quiet strength of a life built with intention. As he walked away from the oak tree and toward the future waiting for him, Ethan knew that the move he made hadn't been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about finally living in a way that felt true. And that truth had changed everything.